what's eating you, partner? Hey, can I ask you a strange question? I mean, it sounds ridiculous, but I'm on the level. There's these funny rock carvings. They look a bit like this. Yeah, well, the thing is, I sort of really badly have to find all of them. Now, it's sort of a puzzle thing to me. I know, it sounds ridiculous, but I'm on the up and up, and it's really important.
Little rock carvings.
Yeah, exactly, little rock carvings.
What do you want to do with them?
Well, it's sort of very complicated, and you'll think I'm jazzed if I tell you.
The mysterious Francis Sinclair and the elusive rock carvings he is seeking encompasses one of the greatest mysteries in Red Dead Redemption 2. Just who is Francis Sinclair, and why is he seeking out these strange rock carvings? Is Francis Sinclair a time traveler from the future, seeking to get back to the year his adult self is from? Or is Francis looking for his deceased father in order to meet him? Is Francis's mother assisting him in his unique quest? This has been a mystery which has perplexed many Red Dead fans over the years, as there's no easy or accessible answers to this mystery. All we have are clues within the actual carvings and the words of Francis himself, which can be analyzed and scrutinized. So without any further ado, let's get into it. It is commonly accepted and believed throughout the Red Dead Redemption community that Francis Sinclair is a time traveler in Red Dead Redemption 2. Upon meeting him, whether playing as Arthur Morgan or John Marston, at Hawk's Eye Cabin in West Elizabeth, which incidentally does not appear on the game map, the player will immediately notice just how much Francis stands out from the time period in which the game takes place. For instance, Francis is wearing clothing that appears much more common in the 20th century, as opposed to the 19th century, specifically between the 1920s all the way through to the 1950s. Francis speaks with a transatlantic accent, which weren't prominent in the US until the 1920s and 1930s. In particular, the slang he uses is a stark contrast to the slang of the late 19th century and seems to be indicative of vernacular used in the 1920s and 1930s. Francis's speech and clothing heavily implies that he is a time traveler from the future. While initially many people believe that Francis is from the 1920s or 1930s, his pants feature belt loops, and although belt loops first appeared in 1922 on Levi's jeans, they apparently didn't become popular until the late 1940s. Francis will explain to you, whether playing as Arthur Morgan or John Marston, that he is seeking the locations of several rock carvings that can be found throughout the surrounding area of his cabin home. Francis doesn't explain why he needs these locations for the rock carvings, and explains to Arthur or John that they would think Francis is crazy if he did explain why he needs the locations. This of course only poses certain questions to the player, such as why is Francis seeking the locations of these rock carvings, and who exactly created them, and when? Sinclair is the ancient Scottish name for St. Clair of France, while Henry Sinclair was the Earl of Orkney, a Scottish noble in medieval Scotland. Henry Sinclair was a Templar knight and a Scottish noble who apparently traveled to America a century before Christopher Columbus. Sinclair, therefore, is a reference to Scotland, which of course is home to Rockstar Games' Dundee studio, and Rockstar North in Edinburgh. Anyways, Henry Sinclair was believed to have left stone carvings and markings throughout Massachusetts and Maine. What's interesting to note about Hawk's Eye Cabin is that it does not appear on the game map, heavily suggesting that it could be from the future. Now, whether that's the near or distant future is not certain, although I could lean towards the near future, as it could have been built after the turn of the century, with Francis being born there and later returning as a young man in his 20s or 30s. Furthermore, it could also suggest that the cabin is only appearing to Arthur or John because Francis is able to access portals inside Hawk's-Eye Cabin, and when he travels to Hawk's-Eye Cabin in the past, it somehow arrives with him. Is his mother involved, and is Hawk's-Eye Cabin actually the time machine? Or is Hawk's-Eye Cabin located on or within a portal? There is a fallen tree behind the cabin which can actually be found underneath a fence around the cabin. So did the cabin teleport there through a portal, or was this just a developmental oversight? Once you have found all of the rock carving locations and mailed them to Francis, after about an in-game day, you will receive rewards from Francis, such as $10, a bottle of Kentucky bourbon, a rock statue, and an invitation from Francis himself. Incidentally, you can discover all 10 locations before first meeting Francis, but the game will only allow you to inspect 9 of the rock carvings. So after you first meet Francis, you'll receive the rewards a day later. And then when you've discovered the final rock carving location and mailed that location to Francis, he will then send you a personal invitation to return to Hawk's-Eye Cabin. Upon returning to Hawk's-Eye Cabin, after you've received the invitation, Francis is not there, and Arthur or John will discover a large mural of sketches that Francis has created. But suddenly, and what seems like it's completely out of the blue, a woman enters the cabin.
Hello? Can I help you?
Oh, I'm sorry for intruding. Mrs. Sinclair?
Yes? How did you know?
I'm looking for your husband.
My husband?
Yeah.
He's dead. He's been dead since just before Francis was born 1 year ago.
Your husband, Francis, is dead?
No, this is Francis. My husband, Tom, is dead.
I'm a little confused.
Yes, I think you are. What was your name?
That's not important. Excuse me.
The behavior demonstrated by Mrs. Sinclair is very suspicious. After you enter the cabin as Arthur or John, Mrs. Sinclair and an infant Francis follow soon afterwards, and Mrs. Sinclair is not alarmed by the presence of a complete stranger in her home. A stranger, mind you, who is armed. Mrs. Sinclair is in fact warm and welcoming, completely unfazed by this stranger's presence, while taking no issue with the large mural or puzzle of sketches left behind by the older Francis. Immediately afterwards, you can re-enter Hawk's-Eye Cabin, and when you do, both Mrs. Sinclair and the infant Francis have both vanished without a trace. Mrs. Sinclair's odd behavior upon discovering Arthur or John in Hawk's-Eye Cabin is highly suggestive that she could be not only in contact, but also in collaboration with the older Francis. Why did she lie to Arthur or John when asked about her husband's death and Francis? Again, this is highly suggestive that she is in collaboration with the older Francis, and that they want to keep the secret of the rock carvings and Francis's ability to time travel. She was probably putting up a front for Arthur or John and playing dumb. In addition, it is very strange that Francis's mother showed absolutely no interest and made no reference to the mural or the other items in the cabin. It is also very strange that the older Francis would set up his proverbial home within the cabin where his mother and younger self appear to live. Unless, of course, if she is acting in collaboration with the older version of her son. Everything regarding Hawkseye Cabin is very suspicious. Not only did the older Francis set up a temporary home in the cabin where Mrs. Sinclair and the younger version of himself live, but also that the cabin itself does not appear on your compass or game map. Mrs. Sinclair and the infant Francis seem to materialize out of thin air and enter the cabin shortly after Arthur or John does when they return looking for the older Francis. Mrs. Sinclair's strange behavior when talking to Arthur or John, specifically ignoring the large mural and belongings in the cabin, and that upon exiting and re-entering the cabin after Arthur or John meets Mrs. Sinclair, both her and the infant Francis have disappeared without a trace. And finally, the fallen tree behind the cabin, which is actually underneath a small fence which encloses a small yard, as if Hawkseye Cabin arrived or teleported to that location. Nonetheless, Hawkseye Cabin is a very strange location, and I believe that the cabin provides major clues regarding this mystery. The right side of the mural features images of ancient and more recent history from the 19th century, while the left side showcases the future, and specifically scientific and technological advances made in the 20th century. Several newspaper articles in the game carry the same article regarding a Frank Sinclair in West Elizabeth and his discovery of rock carvings. The article states that Sinclair maintains the carvings contain evidence of ancient peoples that point to a greater meaning and mystery. Perhaps then these rock carvings are indeed ancient, made thousands of years ago, perhaps by Native Americans who discovered some of the secrets of time travel and traveled themselves, saw Francis in the future, and determined that he would be the one to eventually solve the entire mystery, or the meaning or purpose of time travel, and everything that it involves. The mural showcases all of the unique advantages of time travel and the tremendous extent to which one can view and experience both humanity's history and future. The eye at the top symbolizes that through time travel, Francis is able to see the past, present, and future. The small heads represent the various different ages and stages of Francis's life: infancy, adulthood, elderly, and death. The scroll represents knowledge and wisdom, which is incidentally next to the elderly head of Francis. The lightning bolts represent the great power and knowledge possessed by Francis, the power of time travel, which are like the powers of a god. The clock wheels, which of course comprise the internal workings of a clock, represent time. The angel and airplane could be a reference to the introduction of Red Dead Redemption, when a young woman named Jenny has a brief conversation regarding flight with a preacher. There are soldiers who appear to be from the First World War. We can see New York City, and specifically the Chrysler Building, which was completed in 1930, as well as a Zeppelin. There are factories and exhaust stacks, a large boat, and paved roads, representing how much travel changed in the 20th century. The mushroom cloud, launched rocket, and nuclear symbol, of course, represent the atomic bomb and the oncoming age of nuclear power and weapons. There's also a DNA symbol which showcases the progress in genetic research and development. There's also the moon and Saturn, which represent space travel. There are 3 depictions of Francis entering portals and traveling through time. There's a farmer on a wagon, which of course is a reference to the time when Francis was an infant and small child. A Viking ship, which I initially thought might be a trireme. However, this represents the initial explorations made of North America by Viking explorers, which of course is showcased in the game with the Viking tomb in Roanoke Ridge. A meteorite, which could be a reference to the meteor that crashed near Dover Hill in Roanoke Ridge. There is an alembic, an alchemical apparatus or retort flask set in a tripod stand. Incidentally, a reclusive alchemist named Anthony lives in a small cabin just northwest of Tumbleweed in Gaptooth Ridge, New Austin, and he was close to discovering the secret of changing any base metal into gold. A star which could represent the Star of Bethlehem. A Greek hoplite featuring a Corinthian helmet, as well as ancient Egyptian pyramids, the Sphinx, a Greek or Roman column, and the hoisting and positioning of an obelisk. Incidentally, an obelisk can be found not too far from Hawk's Eye Cabin in West Elizabeth. There are 3 different developments, concepts, or clues that have been discovered regarding this mystery, which should be discounted. The first being the discovery that the infant Francis was in fact a baby doll. I do not believe that the baby model or doll was legitimate and was merely an asset reused for this stranger mission. People playing this game, especially on console, can't possibly discover this naturally while playing Red Dead Redemption 2, as opposed to those on PC, in which they can have a potential window to access the game files. The 2 men found with the 2 dead cows at Rio del Lobo Rock in Rio Bravo, New Austin, is not connected to the Francis Sinclair mystery. Not only were the cows attacked by something, as the blood and claw marks or scratches indicate, but also, if you examine the carving itself, there is only one farmer on the wagon with 1 cow, and they are not being struck by lightning. Rather, the lightning is representative of the power of time traveling through portals. And if you look at the other images of Francis traveling through portals, you'll see there are no lightning bolts being emitted because of this. And I also discount the Epsilon program from Grand Theft Auto or GTA 5, as Grand Theft Auto and Red Dead Redemption take place in 2 separate universes and are not connected. Francis is gone when you return with all of the locations for the rock carvings, so he returned to his own time or a particular time and date, with your help by providing the locations of the rock carvings. In his invitation to Hawk's Eye Cabin, he writes that he wants you to see what he's pieced together and that you shouldn't delay because he will be traveling soon and doesn't want to miss you. But of course, upon returning to Hawk's Eye Cabin, Francis is long gone and did indeed miss you. However, as Francis wrote in his invitation, he clearly wanted Arthur or John to see the mural for a reason. Francis was desperate to get the locations and didn't stick around once he received them from Arthur or John, but wanted to reveal to whoever collected the carving locations what exactly was going on. The mural shows what some of the carvings are and represent, so perhaps Francis was trying to figure out what was missing, and maybe what was missing will provide more clues. Was Francis Sinclair trying to find and meet his father, or was he trying to get back to the year his adult self is from? Was Francis Sinclair trying to solve the great mystery and purpose behind the rock carvings? How did Francis Sinclair travel through time and manifest the portals? Is Hawk's Eye Cabin at the center of this mystery? Is the cabin sitting on top of, built on, or exist within a portal? Whenever Arthur or John approach Hawk's Eye Cabin, are they entering a portal and traveling through time? Or is Francis Sinclair caught in a time loop? Who are the ancient peoples who created the rock carvings? Were they Native Americans or giants? I don't think these questions will ever be answered, nor will this mystery ever be solved. Perhaps it wasn't meant to be in the first place, and Rockstar Games writers and developers are having some fun with us. perhaps I'm completely wrong with my own conclusions, as well as with what I've discounted from the mystery itself. But Hawk's Eye Cabin is a very suspicious location. Regardless, it's mysteries like this one that pique our curiosities and will continue to entice us into this tremendous open world.